The evening was cool and soft when the little girl walked slowly toward the bright cafe on the corner of the street, her steps small and careful, as if she was afraid the world might hear her hunger. Her clothes were old, thin, and looked too big for her tiny body, and her hair fell in messy curls around her face. But her eyes, deep and hopeful, kept looking through the glass window where warm lights and warm food waited inside. People laughed inside the cafe, clinking their cups, enjoying fresh bread, hot soup, and sweet cakes. No one noticed the young girl standing outside with empty hands and an empty stomach. She pressed her fingers together tightly, trying to keep herself warm, and took a deep breath as if preparing for something very difficult. She had been walking all day, searching for work or help, but every door she knocked on had pushed her away. Some said they didn't hire children, others ignored her completely, and some told her to leave and never return. Her stomach had not eaten a real meal in 2 days, and now even the smell of bread was enough to make her eyes fill with tears. She looked small and invisible in the noisy street, but inside her chest was a courage that even she did not understand. She stood at the cafe door, watching a waiter walk by with a plate of steaming food. The smell hit her like a soft punch, warm and painful at the same time. She swallowed hard, gently touching her stomach. She had played piano once, long ago, when her mother was still alive. Her mother used to whisper, "Your fingers were born for music." But now those words felt far away, lost under dust, hunger, and loneliness still. She remembered how the keys felt under her fingers, smooth like river stones, how the sound made her heart lift, how music made the world kinder for a moment. But now she had nothing, no home, no family, no food, only a tiny memory of music, a memory that still lived inside her hands. She looked down at those hands and whispered to herself, "Maybe, just maybe," as if convincing her courage to stay a little longer. She took a slow step toward the door, her breath trembling. She pushed the cafe door open carefully, and the warm air rushed over her like a blanket she had missed for too long. Some customers looked at her, confused, others frowned, and one whispered to his friend, "Where is this girl's parents?" The waiter walked toward her, annoyed, telling her she could not beg inside, that she should leave before the owner got angry. But the girl lifted her chin, trying not to cry, and spoke softly, her voice gentle but full of something strange hope. "May I play your piano for a piece of food?" she asked, her words shaking, her voice tiny, but the meaning very clear. The cafe went quiet for a moment before everyone burst into small laughs. Not cruel, but the kind of laughter adults make when they think a child is saying something silly. A pianist? This starving girl? They thought she must be joking or dreaming. One man said, "She thinks she can play." Another laughed softly and whispered, "This will be interesting." The waiter looked at her again, confused, wondering why a hungry girl would mention a piano instead of asking for money or bread. But the girl didn't laugh. She didn't explain. She didn't back away. She just stood there, looking at the piano in the corner of the cafe like it was the only friend she had left in the whole world. Behind her courage was fear. Behind her fear was hunger. And behind her hunger was a soft, stubborn faith that maybe music could save her again, just as it once did when her mother held her close while she practiced. The cafe owner came out, wiping his hands on his apron, and looked at her with raised eyebrows. He wasn't angry, just surprised. He asked her, "You want to play?" "You?" She nodded once, slowly, like a small bird preparing to fly, even though its wings were shaking. The owner sighed and looked around at the waiting customers, who were now watching closely, curious to see what would happen next. No one expected anything from her, not even a simple melody. She looked too hungry, too tired, too lost to play anything real. But still, something about her eyes made the owner pause. Maybe it was the way she looked at the piano. Not like a child looking at a toy, but like an artist looking at something sacred. After a long moment, he nodded and said, "All right, go ahead, show us." The girl stepped toward the piano, her heart beating fast, her fingers trembling. The cafe grew quiet again. Everyone watching, waiting. expecting nothing but ready for entertainment. She placed her hands above the keys and breathed in, her eyes closing gently, her hunger forgotten for a moment, because in this moment, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. And before anyone understood what was happening, she touched the first key with the softness of a promise, letting her music speak before her voice ever could. The café remained strangely quiet as the girl stood in front of the piano, her small fingers hovering above the keys without touching them yet. Everyone waited, half amused and half curious, expecting nothing more than a childish noise, something to laugh about over their coffee. The owner folded his arms, the waiter leaned against a table, and several customers lifted their phones, ready to record what they believed would be a funny moment to show their friends later. The girl felt their eyes on her, heavy and sharp, but she tried to ignore them, trying to listen only to the soft heartbeat in her chest. Her hands trembled slightly, not because she was afraid of the keys, but because she was afraid of failing in front of the one thing that had kept her alive. Hope. She remembered her mother's face for a brief second, the gentle smile, the warm hands guiding her tiny fingers across old wooden keys. Her mother had always said music was stronger than hunger and kinder than the world, but now, standing here surrounded by strangers and empty stomach pains, the girl wondered if her mother had ever imagined her playing just to earn a plate of food. The cafe owner cleared his throat loudly, reminding her the audience was waiting. She opened her eyes and gave a small nod to herself, as if saying, "It's now or never." She let her fingers fall slowly, almost shyly, but at the very last moment, she stopped without touching the keys. Instead, she looked up, scanning the room. She wanted to understand the people she was about to play for. She wanted to feel their energy the way musicians do before a performance. Their eyes were full of doubt. Some amused, some bored. One woman was already whispering, "Why are we even watching this?" But a little boy near the window looked at the girl with quiet excitement, as if he already believed in her before hearing a single note. That small hope in his eyes gave her strength. She placed her fingers again, took a deep breath, and gently touched one key. The sound was soft but clean, and it surprised her. She had expected the piano to be out of tune, neglected in the corner of a busy cafe, but it answered her like an old friend returning after a long journey. She pressed a second note, then a third, testing the voice of the instrument. People leaned closer, waiting for something to happen, waiting for the joke to end, waiting for the laugh to begin. But the laugh didn't come, because instead of random sounds or clumsy pressing of keys, a gentle, thoughtful melody began to flow out of her fingers, just a small part of a song she remembered from childhood. She played with care, almost whispering through the keys. The customers stopped smiling. The waiter straightened up. The cafe owner's eyes widened. And the woman who had been whispering earlier now stared with her mouth slightly open. The girl didn't notice their change. She was too busy sinking into the music, letting it wrap around her hunger and fear, letting it transform the cold inside her into warmth. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then with more confidence, the notes began to connect like pieces of a broken story finally finding their place. The melody grew clearer, brighter, fuller, and the cafe fell into complete silence. A man near the counter whispered, "This is impossible." But even his voice sounded too loud in the stillness. The little boy near the window leaned forward, his eyes shining. The girl's hair moved gently with the rhythm as she tilted her head, lost in a world that none of them could enter. She wasn't a hungry street child anymore. She was a musician, a storyteller, a child carrying a universe inside her small hands. The cafe owner felt something strange pressing against his chest, something he hadn't felt in years: guilt. He had thought she was joking. He had thought she was just another hungry child making excuses. But now he saw the truth. She wasn't asking for pity. She was offering something pure, something real, something precious. She played a fragment of a song her mother had taught her on the last evening they spent together. The song was gentle, almost sad, filled with spaces where a mother's voice might have hummed along. And as the music filled the cafe, people felt emotions they didn't expect to feel during dinner. Memories of childhood, of lost dreams, of things they loved and forgot, drifted up in their hearts. Her fingers danced over the keys faster now, weaving through high notes and low notes like a bird gliding through wind. She wasn't just playing for food anymore. She was playing to survive. To prove she still had something left, something the world hadn't taken from her. She played with everything inside her, her hunger, her grief, her hope, her memories, asterisk, asterisk. Her courage, and by the time she lifted her hands off the keys, the café was so silent that even the soft hum of the lights sounded loud. She didn't look up immediately, afraid she might see disappointment. But when she finally raised her eyes, she saw something she never expected to see, not laughter, not pity, but stunned faces, softened eyes, trembling breaths. She had silenced the whole café with her music, and they weren't laughing anymore. They were staring at her as if they had just witnessed something rare and unforgettable. The hungry girl who came for food had just shaken their hearts without even knowing it. And this was only the beginning of what her music would change, one person at a time. The last note of her melody still hung in the air like a thin thread of light when the girl slowly lifted her fingers from the keys. She held her breath without meaning to, afraid that the silence around her might break and reveal that everything she had played was only in her imagination. But the silence didn't break, it deepened, stretching through the café like a warm blanket that no one wanted to pull off. Every single person was frozen in their seats, caught between disbelief and wonder. The girl had expected laughter or confusion or even annoyance, but she never expected this complete stillness. She looked down quickly at her hands, as if checking whether they had really done something so powerful. The thin fingers, small and tired, were shaking slightly. They didn't seem like the hands of someone who could do magic. Yet the people around her had seen the magic with their own eyes. A man near the back whispered something to his wife, but even his whisper sounded too loud in the heavy quietness. The little boy by the window had put his phone down, completely forgetting to record. His eyes wide and shining like stars reflected in water. The girl swallowed hard. Unsure of what to do next, should she step away? Should she ask for food now? Should she say thank you? She didn't know the rule for moments like this, because she had never lived such a moment before. She glanced toward the cafe owner, unsure if he was angry or surprised or simply confused. But what she saw in his eyes made her heart beat a little faster, not irritation. Not impatience, but a deep, stunned respect. Something she had never seen directed at her before anyone could speak. Her fingers, almost moving on their own, returned to the keys. She didn't plan to play again. But something inside her begged for one more chance to breathe through the music. She touched a single note, a soft trembling sound, and the cafe seemed to inhale with her. She began a second melody, one even more heartbreaking and beautiful than the first. As if she was opening a door inside her heart that she usually kept locked tight. The customers leaned forward, their eyes soft, some already glistening with tears they didn't want to fall. One woman closed her eyes, letting the music carry her somewhere far away from her problems. Another man covered his mouth with his hand, not understanding why a stranger's music made him remember his late father's voice. The girl's music didn't simply fill the room, it reached inside the people listening, touching things they didn't know were still hurting. The piano keys felt warm now beneath her touch, alive, full of stories they had been waiting years to tell. She let the music move freely, not thinking about mistakes or hunger or judgment. She played as if her mother's hands were guiding her from the other side of time, as if the melody was a thread connecting her to something she had lost but still needed. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in many months, she didn't feel alone. A tiny tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't stop. The melody grew stronger, fuller, shining through the cafe like sunlight, breaking through heavy clouds after a storm. The waiter, who had earlier tried to push her out, now stared at her as if he was seeing a miracle, his annoyance melting into awe. The little boy whispered, almost to himself. "She's an angel." His mother placed a hand over her chest, trying to steady her breathing as emotion thickened in her throat. The girl finally let the last note drift away. Softer than a sigh, she let her hands fall into her lap, her chest rising and falling quickly as if she had run a long distance. She opened her eyes slowly, almost scared to see their reactions. But what she saw made her breath catch. People were wiping tears from their cheeks, some covering their mouths, some staring at her like she was something rare and precious. No one laughed, no one mocked, no one doubted. For the first time in months, she wasn't invisible, she wasn't a hungry stranger. She was a musician, a storyteller, a child with a gift so powerful that even adults could not pretend to ignore it. The cafe owner stepped forward, his voice quiet, almost shaking as he said, "Little one, where did you learn to play like that?" She looked at him, unsure whether to trust him, and whispered a single word that carried the weight of her whole life. "Mama." The cafe owner felt something twist deep inside his chest. The air in the room softened even more. And suddenly everyone wanted to know her story, who she was, how she survived, how she learned something so beautiful while living a life so full of pain. But before anyone could ask anything more, the girl touched the piano one last time, pressing a key so gently that it sounded like a goodbye. She whispered something so quietly that only the closest people heard her. "Thank you for letting me play." Then she stepped back, ready to leave, not knowing whether she would get food, not knowing if they still wanted her there. But the cafe owner raised his hand and said, "Wait," his voice steady and warm, something she had never heard directed at her before. The customers nodded, whispering, urging her to stay. The girl stood frozen, unsure, hopeful, scared, and suddenly aware that something big was changing. Something she never expected. Hearts were opening for her, and doors that had always been closed were beginning to unlock, and without knowing it, the moment she turned back to the piano had changed everything for her life story. A story that had only just begun. The cafe stayed silent even after the girl stepped back from the piano, as if everyone feared that moving or speaking too soon might break the fragile magic still floating in the air. The owner slowly approached her, his face soft and unreadable. The girl lowered her eyes, expecting him to tell her to leave now that the show was over. But instead he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture so unexpected that she stiffened in surprise. He didn't push her away, he didn't scold her. He simply said in a quiet, warm voice, "Sit here. You must be hungry," and pointed to a small corner table. The girl blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Kindness was something she had almost forgotten existed. She hesitated, her feet glued to the floor, afraid that if she moved, everything might vanish like a dream. The owner turned to the waiter and said firmly, "Bring her a warm meal. Not leftovers. A proper meal." The waiter nodded immediately, no longer annoyed, no longer dismissive. He hurried to the kitchen with a seriousness that made the girl feel even more confused as she sat down at the small table. The customers continued watching her, not in a rude or uncomfortable way, but with quiet admiration and curiosity. Some whispered to each other, wondering how such a small, thin child could carry such a powerful gift in her hands. A woman with silver earrings dabbed her eyes with a tissue, saying, "I haven't felt music like that in years." The little boy who had admired her earlier held his mother's sleeve tightly, whispering, "Can she play again?" His mother nodded slowly, still amazed by the moment. The girl sat carefully, her back straight, her hands folded tightly on her lap. She felt shy, exposed, unsure of how to behave around so many kind eyes. She wasn't used to people looking at her with anything other than suspicion or irritation. She kept glancing at the piano, still glowing softly under the warm cafe lights. The keys she had touched looked as if they had woken from a long sleep. The waiter returned with a plate that made the girl's heart skip, a bowl of hot soup. Fresh bread, butter, and even a small piece of chocolate cake. Her eyes widened. She looked around nervously, almost expecting someone to grab the plate away and say it was a mistake. The owner gently placed the plate in front of her and whispered, "Eat slowly. You're safe here." Her eyes filled with water so fast she had to lower her head to hide it. She tasted the soup first, spoon trembling in her hand. The warmth slid down her throat like a soft hug. Her eyes closed as she ate the first real meal she'd had in days. Maybe even weeks. She ate slowly at first. Then a little faster, carefully, quietly. Trying not to look greedy, everyone watched her with soft eyes. Understanding that the food meant more than just food, it meant dignity. It meant care, it meant she mattered after a few moments. The pianist woman sitting near the counter stood up and approached her table. Her steps gentle, her expression thoughtful. The girl felt nervous again, wiping her hands on her dress, as if trying to make herself look less messy. The woman sat down across from her and asked softly, "Where did you learn to play?" The girl hesitated, unsure if to speak or stay silent. Finally she whispered, "Mama taught me." Before she got sick, the woman's eyes softened even more. "And since then?" she asked. The girl looked at her hands again. "I practiced whenever I found a piano. Schools, old shops, sometimes churches let me." She paused, her voice almost breaking. "I just want to play. It's all I have." The woman felt tears prick her eyes. She reached out and touched the girl's hand gently, saying, "You're extraordinary. Do you know that?" The girl shook her head silently, as if the idea of being extraordinary belonged to someone else's life. Not hers. The cafe owner joined them, pulling up a chair, something he rarely did for anyone. He asked her where she lived, and she lowered her eyes again. Not wanting to answer, he understood without words. He exchanged glances with the pianist woman. A silent conversation forming between them, one full of concern and responsibility. Customers continued whispering among themselves, some discussing ways to help her, others simply trying to understand how such talent could be hidden in a hungry child forgotten by society. The little boy approached her timidly, holding a cookie wrapped in tissue, and said shyly, "This is for you. You play better than the people on TV." The girl blinked in surprise and took it with a tiny smile. Whispering, "Thank you," the pianist woman looked at the owner and said, "She has a gift that needs to be protected, nurtured." The owner nodded slowly, still watching the girl as she carefully broke a piece of bread and held it like something precious. He said, "I think her life shouldn't stay this way," his voice shaking slightly with emotion he didn't expect to feel tonight. The girl looked up, confused, unsure why adults were speaking about her with voices filled with worry and hope. She didn't understand the weight of their words. She only understood the warmth of the soup, the kindness of their eyes, and the strange feeling of being seen, not as a burden, not as a beggar, but as someone valuable. What she didn't know was that her small performance had already planted something in their hearts, something growing fast and strong, a desire to change her life, to lift her out of the shadows she had been living in, and to give her the chance to become everything her music promised she could be. And this quiet conversation in a warm cafe would soon become the turning point of her entire future. Though she had no idea yet how deeply her life was about to change, the girl finished her soup slowly, each spoonful warming a part of her that had been cold for far too long. But even as her stomach finally felt alive again, her mind stayed tense. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to kindness, and now dozens of eyes were watching her with concern she didn't know how to accept. When she finally looked up, she saw the pianist woman and the cafe owner still seated near her, waiting patiently as if they understood she needed time to breathe. The pianist woman leaned forward slightly and asked, "Do you have anyone to take care of you?" The girl lowered her gaze again, her fingers twisting together under the table. She didn't want to say the words because saying them made them more real, but she whispered anyway. No. No one. The cafe owner felt his chest tighten. He had seen children in need before. But something about this girl made everything feel heavier. As if she was carrying more than just hunger. She was carrying loneliness, grief, and talent too big for her small shoulders. The pianist woman spoke gently. How long have you been on your own? The girl didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the piano across the room, as if looking at it made her feel safer. After a long moment, she whispered, months. Maybe more. The woman swallowed hard, her heart aching, and said softly, where do you sleep? The girl looked around nervously, her voice trembling, sometimes near the train station, sometimes behind shops. Anywhere safe. The cafe owner exchanged a troubled look with the pianist woman. This wasn't just a hungry child. This was a child surviving by herself in shadows. He felt anger rise in his chest, not at her, but at the world that had let her fall through its cracks so completely. He looked at her again and said, you shouldn't be living like this. She didn't know what to reply because she had no choice in the matter. Her life was a long line of closed doors, and she never expected this one to open differently. A couple sitting at the next table stepped closer. Their faces warm with sympathy, the woman said gently, we saw you play. We've never heard anything like that, sweetheart. The girl blinked in surprise. Unused to adults calling her sweetheart with kindness instead of annoyance. The man beside the woman added, do you want to go to school? Music school, maybe. The girl's eyes widened slightly. The idea sounded impossible, distant. Like a dream for someone else, she shook her head slowly. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't believe she could, she whispered. I don't have money. The man smiled sadly. Sometimes life gives you chances that don't need money. The girl didn't understand. She didn't believe chances like that were meant for someone like her. She had learned to survive by expecting nothing so she wouldn't be disappointed. Another customer stood up, a young woman with tears still shining in her eyes. She said softly, when you played, it felt like someone touched something inside me. Her voice cracked slightly. Your music is a gift. It shouldn't be lost. The girl felt heat in her chest, a feeling she didn't know how to name. Maybe hope, maybe fear, maybe both tangled together. The pianist woman looked at the owner and said quietly but with determination, we can't let her go back to the streets. The cafe owner nodded. A decision forming in his heart faster than he expected, he said to the girl, would you stay here for tonight? Just tonight, so you don't sleep outside? The girl froze, her breath hitching. The offer sounded too good, too kind, too unreal. She shook her head quickly, panicking. I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to be a burden. The owner knelt beside her chair, looking her in the eyes with a seriousness she wasn't used to, and he said gently, you're not a burden. You're a child. And children deserve safety. Her lips trembled. She didn't know how to respond. She felt the familiar instinct to run to escape kindness before it turned into disappointment. But the warmth of the cafe, the kindness of their eyes, and the softness of the meal in her stomach kept her frozen in place. The pianist woman placed her hand on the girl's arm and said softly, I want you to come with me tomorrow. To my music school. The girl looked up, startled. Music school? Her voice barely a whisper. The woman nodded. Yes, I want to see what you can do. Properly, with a real piano, with someone guiding you. The girl shook her head again, overwhelmed. I'm not good enough. The woman smiled gently. Little one, you're more than good enough. You're something special. Those words hit the girl like a wave. Not because she believed them, but because no one had ever said them to her, not since her mother. Not since the last time she played in a warm room with someone who loved her. Tears filled her eyes again. But this time they weren't caused by hunger or cold. They were caused by a door opening. a door she never thought she'd see again. Customers began offering small things, gloves, a warm scarf, a bag of apples, a little money wrapped in tissues. Small kindnesses that felt enormous in her world. She accepted them shyly, her heart shaking with each gesture. And for the first time in many months, she felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Something fragile but powerful. She felt seen, she felt valued. And she felt the beginning of a path she never believed could belong to her. A path her music had finally unlocked, and although she didn't know it yet, this night at the cafe was the night her life began to change forever. The girl stayed seated at the small cafe table long after her soup bowl was empty, her hands wrapped around the warm cup the owner had given her, holding it like a treasure she didn't want to lose. She could still feel all the eyes on her, but now those eyes were gentle, filled with something she didn't recognize at first: kindness, maybe hope, maybe something even deeper. She kept her gaze low, afraid that if she looked directly at them, the moment might break, and someone would tell her it was all a mistake. The pianist woman leaned closer, speaking softly as if trying not to scare her. "Little one, tonight, you don't have to sleep outside." The girl's shoulders stiffened immediately. Her mind racing, she didn't know how to accept offers like this. The streets had taught her that comfort often came with danger, that trust could break as easily as glass. She whispered, "I don't want to cause trouble. I can go." But the cafe owner shook his head firmly and said, "You're not causing trouble. You deserve a safe night." The girl felt a deep ache in her heart, so unfamiliar that she didn't know whether it was fear or relief. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to let the warmth settle inside her without suspicion, but old habits told her to stay ready. Stay alert, stay alone, because alone meant safe. Or at least predictable, still. Something inside her, the small part that still believed in her mother's words, whispered that maybe this was different. The cafe owner stood up and walked to the counter. Returning with a small blanket, he wrapped it gently around her shoulders, surprising her so much she nearly flinched. But the softness of the blanket and the warmth of his gesture grounded her. He said, "We close in an hour. You can stay inside until then, and afterward, we'll decide together where you can stay tonight." The girl nodded slowly, unsure what to say, unsure what she deserved, but grateful in ways she couldn't express. Meanwhile, the customers had started leaving one by one, but almost all of them approached her before they walked out, each offering a few quiet words, gentle smiles, or soft encouragement. A mother handed her a pair of mittens that belonged to her daughter, saying, "They'll fit you." The little boy gave her a drawing he made on a napkin, a piano with a stick figure girl in front of it. Smiling, the girl felt her throat tighten as she accepted these gifts, because no one had given her anything without expecting something back in a long time. After the cafe emptied a bit, the pianist woman asked her softly, "May I hear more tomorrow?" The girl looked up anxiously, unsure if she was expected to perform again. The woman clarified, "Not here. At my music school. I want to see what you can do with a real piano, with proper keys, with proper teaching." The girl shook her head shyly, whispering, "I don't think I'm good." But the woman smiled with a comforting warmth and said, "Talent like yours doesn't disappear. It just needs someone to protect it." The girl felt something inside her crack open, something fragile, something filled with longing, but she didn't know how to say yes without feeling undeserving. She hesitated, drawing circles on the table with her finger, finally whispering, If I don't bother anyone." The pianist woman shook her head. "You won't bother anyone. You will inspire them." The girl didn't understand how she could inspire anyone, but the sincerity in the woman's voice made her chest fill with warmth again. As the night grew deeper, the cafe lights dimmed slightly, and the owner locked the front door. He motioned for the girl to follow him behind the counter. He guided her into a small staff room in the back with an old sofa, a small heater, and a tiny window showing the moon outside. It wasn't much, but to the girl, it looked like heaven. She had slept on cold concrete, hard benches, and dirty corners for months, and now here was a sofa, soft and clean, waiting just for her. She stood there frozen, unable to step closer. The owner placed a folded towel and a small pillow on the sofa and said gently, "This is for you tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out more." The girl blinked hard, holding back tears she didn't understand. She stepped forward slowly, touching the sofa with her fingertips as if checking if it was real. When she finally sat down, the softness made her gasp quietly. It felt wrong to take something so comfortable, yet she couldn't make herself stand back up. The owner turned on the small heater, making the room warm and safe. He said softly, "If you need anything, just knock." Then he walked out quietly, leaving her alone in the warm glow of the room. The girl lay down carefully, wrapping herself in the blanket he gave her, her heart racing with emotions she didn't know how to contain: fear, relief, confusion, hope, all tangled together. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the distant sound of cups being washed, chairs being moved, the hum of the cafe closing down for the night. And for the first time in months, she didn't fall asleep because of exhaustion or fear. She fell asleep because she felt safe, a safety she never expected, a safety she didn't know how to believe in yet, but a safety that marked the beginning of a new chapter waiting just beyond the sunrise. The girl woke up before sunrise, her eyes fluttering open slowly as the faint morning light crept into the small staff room through the tiny window. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Her body tensed out of instinct, expecting to see the cold station floor or the dark alley wall. But instead she felt the softness beneath her, the warmth wrapped around her, the steady hum of the small heater. And for the first time in so long, she remembered that she had fallen asleep without fear. She sat up carefully, almost afraid she would get in trouble for sleeping too comfortably. Her fingers brushed the blanket the owner had given her, and she held it for a long second, letting the warmth calm her heart. Voices softly echoed from the front of the cafe, the sound of cups being arranged, chairs being moved, the smell of fresh bread drifting through the crack under the door. She stood up quickly, brushing her dress to make it look less wrinkled. She didn't want the owner to think she was lazy or ungrateful. She folded the blanket neatly, placed the small pillow back where it belonged, and took a deep breath before opening the door. The cafe was already awake, lights warm, morning customers waiting outside for the doors to open. But the owner and the pianist woman were inside, speaking quietly at a corner table when they saw her. They both smiled, not the forced smiles adults sometimes give, but real smiles, warm smiles that reached their eyes. The girl stepped forward timidly, clutching her hands together, unsure if she was supposed to leave, work, or wait. The cafe owner approached her first, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, and asked in a voice soft enough to break her heart, "Did you sleep well?" She nodded shyly, unable to speak, because her voice trembled too much. The pianist woman joined them, studying the girl with kindness in her eyes. She said, "I came early so we can go together to the music school." The girl felt her stomach twist with nerves. Not fear, but something deeper, something like disbelief. She didn't know how to accept the idea that someone wanted to take her somewhere safe, somewhere filled with pianos, somewhere she might belong. She looked down and whispered, "Are you sure? It's okay if you change your mind." The woman knelt in front of her, gently lifting the girl's chin so their eyes met, and said, "I didn't change my mind. I meant every word." The cafe owner nodded as well, adding, "You deserve this chance." The girl's chest tightened again. She didn't feel deserving, she didn't feel ready, but she felt something growing inside her: courage. Small but real. She took a breath and whispered, "Okay, I'll try." Those words were small, but to the pianist woman and the cafe owner, they were louder than music. Before they left, the owner handed her a small paper bag with a fresh croissant and a tiny bottle of juice, saying, "Breakfast." The girl looked at the bag as if it was the most precious gift she had ever received. She held it carefully with both hands, her heart swelling with a strange feeling she didn't have a name for, but it made her eyes shine softly. The pianist woman placed her hand on the girl's back and guided her gently toward the door. The morning was cool. The street busy, cars humming, people walking fast. The girl felt nervous stepping outside with someone who cared. It felt different from walking alone. Her steps were unsure. But the woman walked slowly beside her, matching her pace, never rushing. The girl kept glancing sideways at her, still half disbelieving this was real. When they reached the music school, the girl froze. The building was tall, clean, with large windows and the sound of faint piano notes drifting from inside. It felt too big, too perfect, too far from anything she had ever known. She gripped the strap of her dress nervously, whispering, "I don't belong here." But the pianist woman placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and said softly, "You belong here more than you think." She led the girl up the steps and into the hallway, where the sound of music echoed like a heartbeat through the building. Students walked around with books, instruments, and backpacks, some greeting the woman respectfully. The girl stayed close to her, hiding slightly behind her side, unsure of how to behave in a place filled with people who had lives she couldn't imagine. The pianist woman guided her toward a large room at the end of the hallway, a room with a grand piano sitting under a beam of sunlight. The girl stopped at the doorway, staring at the instrument with wide eyes. She had never seen a piano so beautiful, she whispered. "It looks like a dream." The woman smiled. "Then let's see how your dreams sound." She encouraged the girl to sit at the piano. The seat felt soft, and the keys gleamed under the sunlight. The girl touched them gently, her fingers trembling again, but this time with excitement rather than fear. She looked up at the woman and whispered, "What do I play?" The woman smiled softly. "Anything your heart remembers." The girl took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her fingers fall onto the keys. The sound that emerged was pure, clear, and so beautiful that even the students passing by the room stopped and stared through the door. The pianist woman felt tears fill her eyes as she watched the girl play a melody so full of emotion that it could melt even the coldest heart. The music filled the entire room, soft at first, then stronger, flowing like a story told without words, and the girl sank into it completely, forgetting the street, the hunger, the cold, forgetting every fear she had carried for months. In that moment, she wasn't a lost child. She wasn't alone. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Her music finally had a home, little did she know. This performance at the music school would change everything for her future, far more than she could ever imagine. The melody flowed out of her fingers like a river finding its way home, and every note filled the music school with a gentle magic that students and teachers could not ignore. They gathered quietly outside the door, watching the small girl whose clothes were worn and whose shoes had holes, yet whose hands moved with the grace of someone born for music. The pianist woman stood behind her, one hand covering her mouth, trying not to cry as she watched the girl lose herself in the keys. The room seemed to breathe with every sound she created. And when the final note faded into silence, the people at the door stood frozen. Unable to speak, the girl opened her eyes slowly, asterisk. The pianist woman joined them, studying the girl with kindness in her eyes. She said, "I came early so we can go together to the music school." The girl felt her stomach twist with nerves. Not fear, but something deeper, something like disbelief. She didn't know how to accept the idea that someone wanted to take her somewhere safe, somewhere filled with pianos, somewhere she might belong. She looked down and whispered, "Are you sure? It's okay if you change your mind." The woman knelt in front of her, gently lifting the girl's chin so their eyes met, and said, "I didn't change my mind. I meant every word. The cafe owner nodded as well, adding, "You deserve this chance." The girl's chest tightened again. She didn't feel deserving, she didn't feel ready. But she felt something growing inside her, courage. Small but real, she took a breath and whispered, "Okay. I'll try." Those words were small, but to the pianist woman and the cafe owner, they were louder than music. Before they left, the owner handed her a small paper bag with a fresh croissant and a tiny bottle of juice, saying, "Breakfast." The girl looked at the bag as if it was the most precious gift she had ever received. She held it carefully with both hands, her heart swelling with a strange feeling she didn't have a name for, but it made her eyes shine softly. The pianist woman placed her hand on the girl's back and guided her gently toward the door. The morning was cool. The street busy, cars humming, people walking fast. The girl felt nervous stepping outside with someone who cared. It felt different from walking alone. Her steps were unsure. But the woman walked slowly beside her, matching her pace, never rushing. The girl kept glancing sideways at her, still half disbelieving this was real. When they reached the music school, the girl froze. The building was tall, clean, with large windows and the sound of faint piano notes drifting from inside. It felt too big, too perfect, too far from anything she had ever known. She gripped the strap of her dress nervously, whispering, "I don't belong here." But the pianist woman placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and said softly, "You belong here more than you think." She led the girl up the steps and into the hallway, where the sound of music echoed like a heartbeat through the building. Students walked around with books, instruments, and backpacks, some greeting the woman respectfully. The girl stayed close to her, hiding slightly behind her side, unsure of how to behave in a place filled with people who had lives she couldn't imagine. The pianist woman guided her toward a large room at the end of the hallway, a room with a grand piano sitting under a beam of sunlight. The girl stopped at the doorway, staring at the instrument with wide eyes. She had never seen a piano so beautiful, she whispered. "It looks like a dream." The woman smiled. "Then let's see how your dreams sound." She encouraged the girl to sit at the piano. The seat felt soft, and the keys gleamed under the sunlight. The girl touched them gently, her fingers trembling again, but this time with excitement rather than fear. She looked up at the woman and whispered, "What do I play?" The woman smiled softly. "Anything your heart remembers." The girl took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her fingers fall onto the keys. The sound that emerged was pure, clear, and so beautiful that even the students passing by the room stopped and stared through the door. The pianist woman felt tears fill her eyes as she watched the girl play a melody, so full of emotion that it could melt even the coldest heart. The music filled the entire room, soft at first, then stronger, flowing like a story told without words, and the girl sank into it completely, forgetting the street, the hunger, the cold, forgetting every fear she had carried for months. In that moment, she wasn't a lost child, she wasn't alone. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Her music finally had a home, little did she know. This performance at the music school would change everything for her future, far more than she could ever imagine. The melody flowed out of her fingers like a river finding its way home, and every note filled the music school with a gentle magic that students and teachers could not ignore. They gathered quietly outside the door, watching the small girl whose clothes were worn and whose shoes had holes, yet whose hands moved with the grace of someone born for music. The pianist woman stood behind her, one hand covering her mouth, trying not to cry as she watched the girl lose herself in the keys. The room seemed to breathe with every sound she created, and when the final note faded into silence, the people at the door stood frozen. Unable to speak, the girl opened her eyes slowly, her chest rising and falling with soft breaths. She expected to be alone, expected to see only the pianist woman smiling at her. But when she looked toward the doorway, She saw a small crowd staring at her with awe. She tensed immediately, gripping the piano bench. Unsure if she had done something wrong, she whispered, "Should I stop? Did I disturb them?" Her voice trembling with fear, but the pianist woman shook her head gently and said, "No, sweetheart. You moved them." One of the teachers stepped forward, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes. He approached the girl slowly as if approaching something delicate. He said, "Little one, how long have you been playing like this?" The girl looked down, unsure how to answer. She whispered, "Since I was small. Mama taught me." The man pressed a hand against his chest. Touched deeply by her words, he exchanged a long, meaningful look with the pianist woman, and both understood what needed to happen next. The girl didn't just have talent, she had the kind of gift that could change her entire destiny. The pianist woman knelt beside her and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, saying, "How would you feel if this became your school? If you learned here every day?" The girl froze, her breath catching in her throat. She shook her head quickly, whispering, "I can't. I don't have money. I don't even have clothes. I don't have anything." The woman smiled and brushed a curl away from the girl's face, saying softly, "You have music. And that is more than enough." The silver-haired teacher stepped forward and said, "We can offer her a full scholarship." The girl blinked at the unfamiliar word. Looking confused, the pianist woman explained gently, "It means you can study here for free. No cost at all." The girl's eyes widened, her lips trembling. She whispered, "Free?" The woman nodded, "Yes, because you deserve it." The girl shook her head slowly, tears filling her eyes, her voice breaking as she whispered, "No one ever said that to me before." The teacher added softly, "You are not just talented. You are remarkable. And remarkable children should not be lost on the streets." The girl wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. Overwhelmed by emotion she didn't know how to control. Hope was a dangerous thing for someone who had known nothing but loss. But now it was right in front of her, warm and real, and glowing like sunlight after a long, dark storm. The pianist woman took her hand and said, "We will help you. Not just with school, but with everything else too." The girl shook her head again. "I don't want to be a burden." But the woman gently pressed her hand, saying, "You're not a burden. You're a blessing." The words hit the girl so hard she had to shut her eyes. Letting a tear roll down her cheek, she didn't feel like a blessing. But hearing it made something inside her bloom, something she thought had died long ago. They brought her back to the café later that evening, where the owner had been waiting anxiously, pacing near the counter like a worried father. When he saw her walk in with the pianist woman, his shoulders relaxed with relief. He rushed forward and asked, "How was it? Did she like it?" The girl ran to him and hugged him tightly, surprising both of them. She whispered against his apron, "They want me to stay. They want me to learn there." Her voice shaking with disbelief, the owner placed his hand on the back of her head. Swallowing hard as emotion tightened his throat, he whispered, "You see? I told you. You deserve more than the streets." She nodded against him, trembling with a mixture of joy and fear. The pianist woman smiled and added, "She will start tomorrow. And I will make sure she has everything she needs." The owner nodded gratefully, wiping his eyes before anyone could see. That night, the girl sat again in the small staff room. But this time she didn't feel like a visitor. She felt like someone who belonged. She lay on the sofa with the blanket wrapped around her, staring at the ceiling with a soft smile she hadn't felt in a very long time. She whispered to herself, "Mama, I think I found a place. I think I found my song again." The next morning, when the cafe opened, customers saw a framed picture on the wall, a picture of the small girl playing the piano, taken by the little boy's mother the night she first performed. Under the photo, the cafe owner had written a small line with pride, "She played for food once. Now she plays for the world." And from that day forward, The girl's life changed in a way she never imagined. Her days filled with music, learning, warmth, and love. She grew into the musician she was always meant to be. And the café that once laughed at her became the place where her miracle began. Her journey was no longer about surviving, it was about becoming. Becoming the girl her mother believed she could be. Becoming the pianist the world deserved to hear. Becoming someone who turned hunger into hope, fear into courage, and silence into a song that would live forever.